Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at some of the most important things you should do when setting up your PC for the first time and installing Windows 11. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so you've got your brand new computer and you're looking to install Windows and get everything set up, and you want it to be as easy and as simple and as straightforward as at all possible, and going without things like blue screens of death or things just not working. So there's a few key things you can do in order to make your installation and your Windows life considerably easier, and that is to follow some of these steps. Now obviously there are going to be very sort of minute differences between different systems depending on how old your system is. If you're using Windows 10 or Windows 11, I would strongly suggest trying to use Windows 11 if at all possible, especially if you're using more modern hardware, as it does have considerably more support. And also the Windows ISO, or the Windows images, will include a lot of the drivers that you'll need straight off the bat to get your system up and running. So basically we're going to try and break this down into probably about 4 or 5 different segments. So the first one is going to be actually the start off and actually configuring your BIOS before you try to install Windows. Now this actually makes a lot of benefits because sometimes you'll find that Windows 11 just won't install because your BIOS isn't set up correctly. So the first thing I would suggest to do, if you haven't done already, when you've got your system and it actually will post and you can get to the BIOS screen, is to do a BIOS update. This is really important. There are lots of security fixes and also stability fixes which the motherboard vendor would have baked into the latest BIOS revisions. Also, for those of you using Windows 11, a lot of the new BIOSes now will actually turn on some of the things which you actually need to be able to install Windows 11, such as turning on things like TPM, secure boot and UEFI compatibility. Now, assuming you've already done your BIOS update, there's a few things we can check in the BIOS to begin with to make sure that everything is going to go well for your Windows 11 installation. So let's take a quick look at that first. So to start off, this is our MSI BIOS on our particular motherboard. Now your BIOS may look slightly different, but this will give you hopefully a good idea of things you should be doing. Now one of the first things I always do is to make sure you've got your RAM set up correctly. So make sure you've got your XMP or your Expo profiles enabled. You can do this either in easy mode or you can do it in the advanced mode. So if we go into OC settings, we can scroll down through, check for DRAM setting. So in this one, XMP is disabled, but Expo is in profile number 1. You may find that your RAM has various profiles available. This one's got 2. So just do check your RAM and make sure that you've got it set to basically what it's supposed to be, or at least what you've paid for. In this instance, our RAM is DDR5 5600. And these are the CAS latencies. Always worth checking on the box for your RAM to make sure that what it says here is actually what it says on the box. Sometimes your motherboard will actually try to create an Expo or XMP profile which closely matches the RAM but may not be exactly right. So just make sure that those match with what you've actually got. Some people often suggest not enabling Expo or XMP until after you've installed Windows. For me personally, I think that's probably a bad idea because most RAM will work absolutely fine without AMD Expo or XMP being enabled, and then when you actually try to enable it, that's when you start getting blue screens of death. So if you do it now before you start installing Windows, you'll know that your system is going to be somewhat stable. Other things to look for, especially if you're installing Windows 11, when it comes to enabling things like TPM, generally you're going to find this is going to be in the security tab in your BIOS. Again, if you're not entirely sure, you may have to use the spyglass at the top to search for things. I actually tried searching for FTPM and it didn't come up, so I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way and just search for it. So if you go into security, and then you've got trusted computing. So if you go into trusted computing, you've then got the option for enabling or disabling your TPM or your security device. So as you can see here, so if I were to search for AMD FTPM, it would have probably come up. So just make sure that you do have TPM enabled for Windows 11 usage. Other things you may need as well, if you're experiencing issues or you're just booting into a BIOS screen and it won't find your drives, is to make sure that secure boot is also enabled. Now secure boot is a requirement of Windows 11, so just make sure that's set to standard. If you set custom, then you can do all kinds of other things, but for most people, the standard TPM key is going to be absolutely fine. So just leave it set to standard and make sure secure boot is enabled. Something else which is really important for Windows 11 and full compatibility is if you go into advanced, you're looking for CSM or UEFI. Now, in the terms of Windows 11 is a UEFI operating system. So ideally you want this set to UEFI, as you can see here. If for some reason you're using an older hard disk drive which was formatted using Windows 7 or Windows 11, you may find that it won't be recognized. In that instance, you do have to actually enable CSM, which is compatibility support mode, in order to find older drives or perhaps older hardware, such as older graphics cards which don't fully support the UEFI protocols. Once you're done in here, save your BIOS and then you can get ready to install Windows itself. Now the next part of this is going to be actually preparing a USB drive with Windows 11 on it. Obviously if you're doing Windows 10 this is going to be slightly different. We have done videos on that specifically, so we'll try and link those in the video description. But for those of you that are going to be installing Windows 11 on a brand new machine, you will need to download the Windows Media Creation tool on another PC and also have a USB drive, ideally somewhere in the region of about 16 gigabytes, should be more than adequate. You will need to download the actual tool. So if you go to the Windows website and you can go here, you've got the Windows 11 installation assistant. So this is if you're installing on a PC which is running Windows 10. If you're doing a fresh installation on a brand new PC, this is the one you want. So create Windows 11 installation media. If you click on download now, you can download the actual tool, save it to the desktop on your machine, run the program. This will take a little while to download and format your USB stick, but it will put on the very latest version of Windows 11, which is extremely important, as we'll discuss next. So with your new Windows 11 installation media ready, there is actually a really good reason for this, and a lot of people fall into this trap. I've done it myself numerous times, and that is when you're actually setting up Windows 11 for the first time on your new computer, generally you're going to have quite modern hardware on there. So getting the very latest version of Windows 11 is going to be very advantageous because hopefully it should have all the drivers that are required for your new motherboard and also the components. Generally, 9 times out of 10, this is absolutely fine. But I would suggest, if at all possible, head over to the manufacturer of your motherboard that you're using in your new system and download some of the drivers. Ideally, the chipset drivers and or the LAN or Wi-Fi drivers. This is going to be really useful because otherwise, if Windows 11 for some reason doesn't detect any internet connectivity, you're basically not being able to do the Windows updates for the first time, which again is extremely important, as we'll discuss next. So at this point, hopefully by now you've got your Windows 11 installation installed and you've gone through setting up your username, password, etc. should you wish to, or potentially you've circumvented that using one of our handy guides. Personally, I would suggest, ideally if you can, do connect to the internet on the installation setup. For this reason and this reason only, is that Windows will actually try and do more updates from the very get-go before you actually get into Windows itself. This again is going to be really handy if you've got a system which is relatively modern, has got new hardware, new components. This will try and download the drivers from the Windows Update website. Now these potentially won't be the best drivers, but hopefully they should be basically compatible, so you should be able to get onto the next part of the installation process. So now with your nice new shiny Windows 11 installation, your world is your oyster. What are you going to do next? Now it's very tempting to go onto the internet now or download Steam, install all kinds of things, set up your RGB, all that kind of stuff. But don't. Wait just a minute. There's some things we need to do first before we do all that stuff. Now it's really important that Windows has the right drivers. If you want to avoid blue screens of death, crashing, and just the system not running as fast as it should do, here's some things which I would definitely suggest doing before you start getting into installing games and enjoying your computer. Now the first one is going to be to download the chipset drivers for your motherboard and all the drivers for other hardware, such as your graphics card, Wi-Fi drivers, etc, etc. Anything which hasn't been picked up by Windows Update. Now in this instance, there's various options you can do. I would suggest going over into Windows Update first of all. Click on the Windows Update and just try and get as many updates as at all possible. Keep on repeating this process and restarting your computer until all of the Windows updates have been successfully downloaded and installed. This is actually really important again because this is giving you a really good foundation for the rest of your system. Now at this point, when Windows has done everything it needs to do and it's pulled all the drivers down, you're probably thinking, well, I'm good to go now, right? No, you're probably not. What I would suggest doing now is to now download the drivers specifically for your components. Now, in terms of components, I mean things like your graphics cards. So if you're using an AMD graphics card, head over to the AMD website. Links for this will be put in the video description. download the AMD all-in-one installer. Now, if you've got an AMD motherboard, this is even more important because Windows will just install the default drivers, whereas the AMD software updater will actually download all the chipset drivers and all the recent updates to make your system completely stable. Well, at least in theory. If you're having an all AMD system, so you've got an AMD chipset, AMD processor and AMD graphics card, the all-in-one driver should install pretty much everything, including the latest Radeon drivers, which again are extremely important. If potentially you've got a system built on the Intel platform, then I would suggest going over to the Intel website. They have a very similar thing again. I'll put some links for this in the video description. So Intel now have their kind of all-in-one software updater. So you can go over to the Intel website, install their package, and then you can get on. Windows will install all the relevant drivers for your motherboard and actually check for other things as well. If you've got an Intel graphics card, such as the A770 or A750, it will also update the drivers for that as well, so you can get all of your drivers pretty much in one place, which is a really handy thing to do. If you have a system which has a combination of parts, so maybe you've got an AMD processor on an AMD motherboard, but you've got an NVIDIA graphics card, then again, the same thing applies. Do your motherboard stuff first, get that out of the way, then the last thing to do is your GPU drivers. So if for some reason your AMD, Intel or NVIDIA graphics card drivers aren't installed, head over to the relevant websites, again, nvidia.com, amd.com, intel.com, etc., and get the latest specific driver for your graphics card. This is something which I would do towards the end of the process. The reason for this is because we want to build up a stable platform first of all, so your chipset drivers are really important to gain that really sound foundation. Do the graphics card drivers last, as tempting as it is to do it first. Now at this point you should have pretty much all your drivers installed, you've done all your Windows updates, so now you're pretty good to go. Now again, before you rush in and start installing Steam or Epic Games and start downloading games, there are some things you want to do, and that is some benchmarks and stress tests, just to make sure that your system is behaving pretty much as it should do. Now don't worry if for some reason when you're running some of these benchmarks that your system doesn't perform quite as well as it should do. In the background, Windows is still doing a few bits and pieces, trying to kind of get things together, sorting out your hard drive, downloading files, and just reorganizing things. So don't be too worried if straight away your results aren't absolutely stellar. Although, if your results do fall short of what they should be, then it's time to do some diagnostics and see what is going on. Now, some of these downloads will actually help you with this. So there's about 3 or 4 main components which I would suggest downloading in order to benchmark your system. In no particular order, we'll go through them now on the computer. So we've got our system, we've got all our drivers installed, etc., and we're pretty good to go. So first thing I would suggest doing is download a program called HWmonitor from CPUZ. Links will be in the video description. Type it into Google, you can find it very simply. Now, if you open up this program, this is going to give you some idea of what is going on in terms of your system temperatures, which can have a really big effect on the way your system performs. So let's drag this over so we can have a quick look and scroll to the top. Something which is actually quite important, making sure that your power supply is behaving as it should do. So check things like your 12 volt, your 5 volt and your 3.3 volt rails. If you check those out, they should all be pretty standard, pretty stable. If for some reason they're not, then potentially you've got something wrong with your power supply. Even something as simple as one of the plugs not being fully seated. So definitely check those. Other things you can check here are things like your temperatures, so your CPU core temperature or package temperatures, which are around here. Look at these and make sure they're within the expected norms. If yours is idling just in this Windows environment and these are really high, potentially you've not mounted your CPU cooler correctly. Or maybe you've done something which I've done before and you've left the plastic cover on the CPU base plate. Not a great idea. So this is a really good way of checking that everything was in normal ranges. Again, same for your graphics card. Scroll on down and you can find all of your components. So there's our Radeon RX 6600. You can see the hotspot temperature, 33 degrees, global 33. So that is very nice. Those are nice low temperatures, what we would expect to see. So now my group of tried and tested methods of kind of just getting a stability readout and some temps on the system. There's 4 main programs: CPUZ, Cinebench, Unigene Heaven, and Crystal Disk. Now between those 4, you should stress out pretty much every section of the computer. Now the first one is going to be CPUZ. That's a pretty easy one to do. Let's fire that up quickly. So this is somewhat of more of a validation tool really. So it tells you what is going on with your processor, all the kind of stuff there. Also details about your motherboard, so you can check to make sure the latest BIOS is installed, all that kind of stuff, and that it's running at the right things like PCI Express Gen 4, etc, etc. Also, memory, you can check that your memory is running at the right speed. Now this is a question we get very often. People say, my memory is only running at about half the speed. Now that is because you're using DDR RAM, or double data rate. So a lot of programs will actually report it on the kind of the single bus speed. So this RAM is actually 5600 megahertz. So it kind of drops down to 28. So 28 plus 28 is 56. Basically double that rate. Also in here, you can double check to make sure that your CAS latencies in your primary timings and your tertiary and other timings, you can just make sure those are okay. Make sure that Windows thinks it's using your RAM at the right speeds. This can be good for stability. Also in SPD, you can make sure that you've got the right RAM setup. So it gives you some of your Expo settings. So here we've got Expo 5600, and that is what it's running at. And these are the other options. You can't really do a great deal in here, but it will tell you what is going on and what your system's all about. Graphics will tell you what graphics are installed. This one's quite useful, bench. So you can basically just go in and either stress your CPU or bench your CPU. If we do bench CPU, this is a pretty quick test. It'll just basically stress the multi-threads very quickly, and then it will go ahead and do the single processor or a single core. You should find at this point as well that your fans potentially will ramp up to deal with the heat. And if we head over onto the side here and look at our temperatures from HWmonitor, we should now see that we've had a little bit of a spike. So our package temperature jumped up to 62 degrees Celsius from its normal ambient or idle temperature of around about 40. If you leave it on a lot longer or do the stress, you can probably see this go up to the high 70s, 80s, 90s, depending on your processor. So this is a good way of just making sure that it's running. You can also, there is a reference chart down here. You can scroll through. If you can find a processor which is similar to yours, then you can see if it is performing within kind of normal expectations. So if we say here Ryzen 9, we can see that this is only a Ryzen 7. You can see it's kind of within the same ballpark, especially for the single core. So that's CPUZ, pretty simple, straightforward, not a great deal going on there, but more of a thing to validate your system is running as intended. Now the next one is going to be Cinebench. This is a free download. You can get this from the Windows Store, so you don't have to worry about looking around for kind of dodgy links here, there and everywhere. You can of course get it from the Cinebench website as well. I find it just as easy to get it from the Microsoft Store. This you can go in and essentially just run either a single test, which I would suggest doing, just do a quick multi-core test. This will stress out the system, and if your PC is going to crash, this is pretty much when it's going to do it. You can also, again, keep an eye on the package temperatures. So ours there, we're running at our default, so we're getting up towards the 90s already, which is expected for the Ryzen 5 platform. So yeah, we've got no problems there. It is doing what it's meant to do because we haven't tuned the BIOS or the processor to run within other limits. This is expected, and what we want to do is get to the end here. We'll see a Cinebench score. Then we can actually go over to a website such as CPUMonkey and do a comparison and see what you're getting. Now again, you may not get the same results. Here we're getting around about 19603, which actually for this setup is about right where it should be. We've got a ton of stuff running in the background, all these things, so that does have a knock-on effect. But it didn't crash. We're getting expected temperatures, and our score is within kind of tolerances. So I'm happy that this is working as it should do. You can, of course, if you want to, for a longer test, you can run a stability or a throttling test. Throttling tests are a little bit more difficult to do these days with modern processors running as hot as they do, but stability tests for 30 minutes is going to give you a good idea if your system's running fine. Also, after running Cinebench, do check your voltages there for your power supply. Make sure they're holding up and not dipping down. As you can see, these are pretty much rock solid, so no issues with our power supply. Now, the next one is going to be Unigene Heaven. Now, for this instance, I'm not going to run it at its full screen because basically you won't be able to see it. We'll just run this side by side. This is a pretty good benchmark for making sure your graphics card is running as it should do. And just click on benchmark and you get a benchmark score, etc. If we now scroll down HWmonitor, we can have a look and see what is going on with our graphics card. Now you see there, we're now at 55C. We are actually running the benchmark at the moment, so it is pretty much doing what it should do. The fan hasn't kicked in yet. Oh, there we go. It's just kicked in now. So this is running as expected, we're not getting any crashes. If you want to, you can run this right through to the very end, get your benchmark score. Again, same deal. If you just go onto the internet, type in your graphics card and your Unigene score, you can get an idea of whether or not it's behaving or giving you results as they should do or within expected tolerances. So this is a good one. Again, you can run this, leave this looping if you want for ages and just make sure your system isn't overheating in general. A very good tool for generating a little bit of heat and is a very small download. Again, I'll try and put links for this in the video description. And the last one is going to be Crystal Disk. So Crystal Disk is actually a pretty decent one. If you've got an NVMe drive or SSD, when you actually install it, make sure that you've got NVMe SSD set here, and then you can go in and basically test your drive. This will run a 1 GB file through all these different tests. Click on all, basically let it go through, do its thing. Depending on your PCI Express revision, the drive type, etc., etc., you can get a rough idea of where your drive's going to be doing. So a PCI Express Gen 4 drive, if it's one which is running at ×4 speeds, you should be getting somewhere around about the sort of 4 GB per second, or what we've got here. So this is kind of working as normal. Let it run through all the tests and make sure your read and write speeds are within the norms that are expected from the drive. This way you know that your chipset drivers are working and your drive isn't actually overheating. So if you've got this far through the video, congratulations, well done, and thanks for watching. These are some very, very good steps to take with your brand new PC, especially to make sure that everything is working as it should do. Now, potentially at some point along this kind of pipeline of things, you potentially might get stuck. And that is why we have a fantastic Discord, which you're more than welcome to join. It's completely free of charge, so you can just head on over and ask any questions. Now, the chances are, if you're having stability issues, some of the things which we've gone through in this video are things which we're going to ask you. Have you checked your temperatures? Have you checked your voltages? Have you done your Windows updates? Have you done your chipset drivers? And all those kinds of things. So this is actually going to be something which we probably will refer people to. So if you're watching this, if you've come from our Discord, then again, thank you for joining us and thank you for watching the video, and hopefully it's given you some tips on how to get the best out of your system, or perhaps it showed you areas where potentially you may have gone wrong or just missed a step out of the pipeline, and that is why your system isn't behaving as it should do. Now clearly there's going to be some other things you can do here after you've done your initial setup and made sure that everything is stable and is working as it should do. Those are going to be basically BIOS tweaks and also Windows tweaks. Now maybe you want to get rid of OneDrive, maybe you want to get rid of Cortana, those kinds of things, or maybe in the BIOS you just want to reduce your temperatures and tweak your processor. That is definitely something you can do at a later date. You don't necessarily need to do it straight away, depending on your temperatures. This video is entirely aimed at making sure that you have a stable platform to work from. If you don't have a stable platform to begin with, and then you start making tweaks, like you install Ryzen Master or Intel Overclocking Tuner, those types of things, and you make some tweaks there, and then you start getting instability, you're not really going to know whether the instability has come from the tweaks you've made or your system platform is unstable to begin with. So going through these relatively straightforward things are definitely well worth doing, in my opinion. But what I think about it doesn't really matter. What you think about it does. So let us know in the comments section. Do you think this is good advice? Is this the sort of way that you'd set up your system? Have you learned the hard way, like myself, over the years, and now you've got yourself finely tuned to know exactly what to do on every build? Let me know in the comment section. I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts. And also, if you've got any other tools which are your go-tos for actually installing on a brand new system to validate temperatures, specifications, performance, all that kind of thing, genuinely going to be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that. Well, I think that's going to wrap this video up. Thanks very much for watching. Like I said before, if you've got any comments or questions, stick them down below. If you need more help with hand-holding, we're over on our Discord, which again, links will be in the video description, as will links for pretty much all the software listed in this tutorial. So if you want to download them from there, you certainly can do, or a quick Google search generally will pick them up as well. So anyway, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.